terrifying true story begins in a quiet, unassuming neighborhood, the kind of place where everyone feels safe. Harriet Creek Ranch, Texas. It's November 22nd, 2019, a cool evening, just before the holiday season. The homeowners of one particular house were away on vacation, completely unaware that their home was about to become the center of a national mystery, a case that would later be known as the chilling case of the Doorbell Ghost Girl. Around 8 p.m., their doorbell camera activated. The footage that it recorded is short, grainy, and absolutely bone-chilling. This clip has been featured in countless online videos, like Top 5 Scariest Things Caught on Camera. It shows a young girl, probably between 9 and 12 years old, running up to the front door. She's wearing a simple t-shirt and pants, not nearly warm enough for a November night, and she's holding a small flashlight that cuts through the darkness. Her face is a mask of desperation. Her eyes are wide and she's breathing heavily, as if she's been running for a long, long time. The most terrifying part is how she keeps looking over her shoulder, whipping her head around to peer into the blackness of the street behind her. She's not just lost, she's running from something or someone. This scene is something straight out of an unsolved mystery. Her small fists beat against the door. "Help, please," she cries, her voice thin and shaky. When no one answers, a wave of pure panic washes over her. She jiggles the doorknob, hoping it's unlocked. "Please help," she begs again, her voice cracking with fear. But the house remains dark and silent. The family she hoped would save her was hundreds of miles away. After a few more frantic moments, she gives up and runs off the porch, disappearing from the camera's view, leaving behind nothing but an eerie silence and a million questions. Many have called this incident a real-life horror story caught on tape. When the homeowners finally checked their phone and saw the notification, it was far too late. They watched the heartbreaking footage, feeling a profound sense of helplessness. They immediately called the police, who came and searched the area but found nothing. There were no signs of the girl, no footprints, no clues. It was as if she had materialized on their porch and then vanished into thin air, which sounds like a classic case of paranormal activity. The homeowners didn't recognize her. They asked their neighbors, but no one knew who she was. She wasn't a child from the neighborhood. Desperate for answers, they did what so many people do in this situation. They posted the video online. They hoped someone, anyone, might recognize her and shed some light on this terrifying mystery. The video spread like wildfire. Millions of people watched it, shared it, and debated it, and with all that attention came the theories. One of the first and most cynical theories was that this was all a setup. Some people believed the girl was being used as bait by a group of robbers. It's a known tactic and a truly cruel one. A child or a woman pretending to be in distress rings the doorbell. The unsuspecting homeowner, driven by compassion, opens the door to help. And that's when the criminals, hiding just out of sight, rush in to rob or harm them. This kind of scenario is often featured in true crime documentaries, but the more you watch the footage, the less this theory holds up. I've watched it dozens of times, and the fear in that little girl's voice, it feels real. It's not the performance of a child, coached by criminals. It's the raw, unfiltered terror of someone who believes their life is in danger. The way her voice trembles, the frantic energy in her movements, it feels too genuine to be an act. For a child that young to fake that level of distress would require a level of acting talent that's almost unheard of. I just don't buy it. Which leads us to the second and far more tragic theory. This theory connects the girl on the porch to another mystery, one that began 9 months earlier and over 1,000 miles away. It connects her to a 9-year-old girl named Serenity Dennard. Serenity had a difficult life. She had been diagnosed with reactive detachment disorder and disruptive mood dysregulation disorder, conditions that made it hard for her to form emotional bonds and caused her to act out, often by running away. She was living at the Black Hills Children's Home, a treatment facility near Rockville, South Dakota. Her story is a heartbreaking case often referred to as the unsolved disappearance of Serenity Dennard. The story of the girl on the porch is terrifying because of how much we don't know. It's a ghost story caught on camera in a way. But sometimes the most frightening encounters aren't with strangers in the dark. Sometimes the most disturbing footage captures a monster. You know, someone you once cared about, whose name you know, and whose voice you recognize. That's what makes our next story. A case often titled The Disturbing Case of Allison Duckro, so deeply unsettling. It's not an unsolved mystery. It's a real-life horror story, unfolding in real time, a true stalker caught on camera. Let's move to Sydney, Ohio, on the morning of July 31st, 2022. It was a normal Sunday. 22-year-old Allison Duckro and her mother had just gotten back home after having breakfast together. They were walking inside when an unfamiliar car suddenly pulled into their driveway. A man got out and walked toward the front door. But as he got closer, Allison realized he wasn't a stranger. It was James Rail, her ex-boyfriend. Think about that for a moment. This wasn't a recent messy breakup. They had split up over 18 months earlier, a year and a half. For most people, that's more than enough time to move on. He was a closed chapter in her life, and yet here he was on her doorstep, uninvited and unannounced, creating a scenario straight out of a When Ex-Boyfriends Turned Psycho video. Her decision to ignore him was rooted in something that had happened just the night before. He had left her a voicemail, a truly creepy voicemail that sounds like something from a horror movie. It's the kind of audio you'd find in a chilling audio recordings you shouldn't listen to alone compilation. In the message, you can hear him stumbling over his words, trying to sound casual, but the loneliness and obsession seep through. "Hi, Ali," he began. "It's James. I just wanted to reach out to you to see how you're doing." The message ends with a plea. "Please give me a call back." Allison never responded. She didn't want to reopen that door. So when he showed up, anyway, she made the choice that any of us would make. She decided not to answer. Through the live feed of her doorbell camera, she watched him, waiting for him to leave. He stood on the porch for about 3 long, tense minutes. Finally, he turned and walked away. Allison probably felt a wave of relief. The worst was over. But he wasn't gone. James didn't get back in his car. Instead, he began circling the house, methodically checking for another way in. He was looking for an open window, an unlocked back door, any vulnerability he could exploit. The situation had just escalated from an unwanted visit to an active home invasion, a scenario that is one of the scariest real-life fears. When his search failed, his frustration boiled over. He returned to the front door, but this time he wasn't just knocking. He started throwing his shoulder against it, trying to break the lock, trying to force his way inside. Inside, the family's sense of safety was shattered. This was no longer just about Allison. Her entire family was now in danger. They were trapped in their own home by a man who was becoming more agitated and violent by the second. As the wood of the door frame began to splinter and crack under the force of his blows, Allison's father was faced with an unimaginable choice. His family was in danger. The man outside was actively trying to break in, turning this into a real-life nightmare caught on camera. Left with no other option to protect his family from a violent break-in, Allison's father retrieved his firearm. The confrontation ended in a single tragic moment. By the time the police, who the family had already called, arrived, it was too late. The scene that awaited them was one of trauma and shock. A legal battle began, and on August 4th, 2022, Allison's father stood trial. In court, he was asked if he knew about the messages James had sent. He said no. It underscored how suddenly this terror had escalated for him. But in the end, the family's words weren't their only defense. They had the footage. The doorbell camera had recorded everything. It showed James Rail arriving uninvited. It showed him trying to break down the door. It was clear, undeniable proof that the family was acting in self-defense against a direct and violent threat. Thanks to that footage, in a case that became a viral How a Ring Camera Proved Self-Defense story, Allison's father was acquitted of all charges. This story is a chilling reminder of how quickly a situation can spiral out of control. It highlights the dark reality of obsessive behavior and the terrifying vulnerability we can feel. Even in the place we're supposed to be safest, the very technology designed to see who's at the door became the silent witness to a tragedy, capturing a story not of a mysterious phantom, but of a very real and very human horror, the kind you'd see featured in a true crime documentary. The terror we saw in Allison Duckro's story is visceral and immediate. It's the fear of a physical threat, of a door breaking down. But there's another kind of fear, one that's quieter, stranger, and in some ways even more unsettling. It's the kind of story that gets featured in videos titled 5 Encounters That Will Make You Question Reality. It's the fear that comes not from a direct threat of violence, but from the complete and utter violation of your sense of reality. It's when someone shows up at your door not to break in, but to break your peace of mind. For our next story, a classic unexplained mystery, we traveled to Carrollton, North Texas on the night of January 18, 2025. A homeowner was out shopping, running errands on a perfectly ordinary evening. And just like in our first story, her phone buzzed with a notification. Motion detected at the front door. She's probably thinking it's a package delivery. She opens the live feed on her phone, and the ordinary world melts away, replaced by a scene from a real-life nightmare. Standing on her porch is a man. He's dressed entirely in black, but it's his face, or what's in place of his face, that freezes the blood in her veins. He's wearing a mask, a bright red demonic goat mask, with horns curling upwards and empty, soulless eyes. This is the kind of image you'd expect to see in a top 5 scariest things caught on Ring Cam's compilation. Imagine seeing that. You're in a brightly lit grocery store, and on the small screen in your hand is a demonic figure standing on the one spot on earth you're supposed to feel safest. He's holding a plain cardboard box, which somehow makes the whole scene even more bizarre. The figure moves closer to the door, the camera capturing the chilling detail of the mask. He doesn't knock. He doesn't try the doorknob. He just rings the doorbell once. A calm, deliberate action that is completely at odds with his terrifying appearance. And then he turns and walks away, but not before leaving something behind. It's a sign. Scrawled on it are the words, Revelation 20, verses 1 to 15. The homeowner, watching all of this unfold, was paralyzed with fear. She immediately called the police. her voice lightly trembling as she tried to describe the surreal scene. But here's where the horror takes a new turn. When the police investigated, they found themselves in a difficult position. The man hadn't actually committed a crime. He hadn't broken in, he hadn't stolen anything, and he hadn't made a direct threat. He had simply worn a costume, rung a doorbell, and left a sign. In the eyes of the law, what could they do? It was the perfect example of psychological terror. But the message he left behind elevated this from a creepy prank to an act of pure mental torment. For those who aren't familiar, Revelation 20 is one of the most intense and apocalyptic passages in the Bible. It describes the binding of Satan in a bottomless pit, the final judgment of humanity, and the eternal torment of the wicked in a lake of fire. This wasn't a random act. It was a calculated message of damnation, delivered by a figure who looked like a character from the very scripture he was referencing. The homeowner was left completely traumatized. In a later interview, her fear was palpable. "I'm scared," she said. "I'm scared to leave the house. I'm scared to be at the house." The man in the goat mask didn't need to break a window to shatter her sense of security. He had proven he knew where she lived, and he had delivered a message that was both terrifying and completely indecipherable. Was it a targeted threat from a dangerous cult? Or was it an incredibly cruel prank designed to mentally scar its victim? A true case of a prank gone horribly wrong. We'll likely never know. The man in the red goat mask was never identified, and he has become one of the internet's most chilling unsolved mysteries. He is still out there somewhere, a phantom who brought a vision of hell to a quiet suburban doorstep and then vanished, leaving behind a lingering question that is almost as scary as the act itself. Why? The lack of an answer is what makes this encounter so deeply disturbing. It's a reminder that sometimes the scariest thing a person can do is show you a monster and then leave you alone in the dark to wonder if and when it's coming back. The stories we've heard so far are about the terror of the moment, a child in danger, an ex-boyfriend breaking down a door, a demonic figure on the porch. They are about the fear of what might happen, often filed under chilling encounters caught on camera. But doorbell cameras don't just capture threats. Sometimes they solve tragedies after they've already happened. This is a story about how a doorbell camera solved a brutal murder and how it exposed the killer's lies. But what happens when the monster isn't a stranger in a mask? What happens when it's the monster you invited in? Someone you trusted, hired, and paid to help you build a dream? That's a different kind of horror, a betrayal that cuts deeper than any broken lock. This brings us to the tragic case of Sharon Gordon in Dudley, United Kingdom on July 21, 2023. Two elderly women were worried about their friend, 58-year-old Sharon Gordon. They hadn't heard from her in a few days. After their calls went unanswered, a knot of dread began to tighten. They decided to go to her house to check on her. They let themselves in, calling her name, but the house was too quiet. As they made their way inside, they found her. Sharon was lying face down near the stairs in a scene of unimaginable violence, a truly brutal crime scene. The police arrived, and it was clear this was a homicide. The first critical question is always the same. Who was the last person to see the victim alive? But this time, they had an eyewitness that never sleeps, one with a perfect memory. Sharon's doorbell camera, the kind of footage you'd see in a killer's caught on camera documentary. Investigators began scrolling back through the footage, watching the normal comings and goings until they found him. The last visitor to her home It was her contractor, a man named Peter Norgrove, in what would become a shocking story of a trusted professional turned killer. When the police questioned him, Norgrove was calm. He admitted he had been at the house, but he claimed that Sharon was perfectly fine when he left. It was his word against a silent, empty house. But the camera doesn't lie. As investigators watched the footage more closely, zooming in on the moment Norgrove left the house, they saw it. The single piece of damning evidence that would unravel his entire story. There were dark stains on his trousers, stains that looked horrifically like blood. That single detail gave investigators what they needed. They secured a warrant, and in his shed, they found the weapon he had used. Faced with the undeniable proof, a classic case of a killer caught by his own mistake, Peter Norgrove's story crumbled. He confessed. The motive wasn't some dark, complex secret. It was tragically simple. Sharon had hired him to build an extension on her home, but the project had dragged on. She had finally had enough and decided to confront him. An argument broke out, a dispute over a construction project. But this time, something inside Peter Norgrove snapped in an act of senseless violence. He lost his temper, grabbed a hammer, and attacked her. He later pleaded guilty and was sentenced to life in prison. In this heartbreaking story, the key doorbell camera couldn't prevent a tragedy, but it did ensure that a victim got justice from beyond the grave. It captured the truth, providing the crucial clue that pointed detectives in the right direction and exposed her killer's lie. It gave a voice to a victim who could no longer speak for herself, making sure the man she trusted, the man who took her life, could not get away with it. We often imagine that if danger were to come to our door, it would be loud and obvious. But sometimes it begins with the simple ring of the doorbell and a face that is just wrong. It's the kind of creepy encounter that your instincts scream about before your brain can even process it. Picture this. It's just after midnight in Fresno, California on October 6th, 2024. Kristen Paul is at home when the doorbell rings. She walks to the door and opens it without checking. But it wasn't her husband. Standing on her porch was a woman she had never seen before. And there was something terrifying in her eyes. Kristen described it as a crazed look, a vacant stare that was completely devoid of reason, a classic example of a stalker caught on ring cam. In that split second, every alarm bell in Kristen's body went off. She slammed the door shut. But the encounter was far from over. The woman on the other side became enraged. She started banging on the door, screaming, and then moved to a nearby window and trying to break her way in. Kristen, now in a full-blown panic, called the police and armed herself, preparing to defend her home in a potential home invasion. Luckily, this story has the ending we all hope for. An officer arrived within minutes. It's a terrifying thought, how a few seconds can be the only thing standing between a terrifying close call and a tragedy. That kind of direct, violent threat is horrifying. But what about a silent, anonymous threat that is just as deadly? Let's go to Midlothian, Texas, on August 12th, 2025. The Wilson family was asleep. At around 1 a.m., their daughter was woken by a bright flash of light. The entire front yard was engulfed in flames. This was no accident. The doorbell camera revealed the horrifying truth in a clear case of arson caught on camera. Someone, a figure hidden by a hoodie and a mask, had calmly walked up to their home, poured gasoline all around it, lit it on fire, and then fled. The police were never able to identify the arsonist. The family was left psychologically scarred, terrified that the anonymous attacker who tried to burn them alive was still out there. From the violent to the vengeful, these cameras see it all. And sometimes they capture things that belong in a 5 Most Unexplained and Bizarre Videos compilation. In the early morning of March 11th, 2025, a homeowner in Pennsylvania was awoken by a notification. The footage showed a person in a tie-dye cloak. Their face was hidden by a deeply unsettling paper plate mask, decorated with crudely drawn teeth and glowing red eyes. The figure placed a box on the doormat, looked into the camera, and in a strange voice announced, "I am the box demon." As a faint, creepy lullaby played, the figure walked away. People online later suggested the figure was dressed as a character from a Roblox horror game, making this a bizarre case of video game horror brought to life. The true meaning behind this strange act remains a complete mystery. But our final story is perhaps the most harrowing. It's a story about what happens when the knocking doesn't stop. When a Halloween prank goes horribly wrong and your home becomes a prison. Late one night in Alexandria, Virginia, a doorbell camera captured pure, sustained terror. At around 10 p.m., 3 figures in full Halloween costumes appeared outside a family's home. The knocks grew louder, more aggressive. It was no longer a prank. It was an attempt to intimidate. When they couldn't force open the front door, they moved to the backyard, slashing through a fence, smashing a screen, and pounding on the windows. Through the glass, the terrified family could hear them yelling, their voices filled with rage. "Open the door," they chanted, and then a threat. "It's either you coming out or we coming in." For 6 to 10 minutes, an eternity, the family was held hostage in their own home by these masked intruders. Eventually they left, but not before leaving the family completely shattered, a situation that is a perfect example of a real-life home invasion nightmare. These cameras, these small pieces of technology, have inadvertently opened a window. They've pulled back the curtain on the strange, terrifying, and sometimes tragic events that unfold on the doorsteps of ordinary people. They've shown us that the thin barrier of wood and glass that separates our safe, quiet world from the unseen horrors outside is tested far more often than we ever imagined. And sometimes, the only thing watching is the unblinking eye of a camera, recording the moments when that darkness decides to knock. Imagine it's late, you're away from home, maybe on vacation, and your phone buzzes with a notification from your doorbell camera. You open the app, and what you see makes your heart stop. A little girl, no older than 9 or 10, is standing on your porch, her face filled with pure terror. She's clutching a small flashlight, and every few seconds she glances back into the darkness as if she's being hunted. You lean closer to your phone, turning up the volume, and you hear her small, trembling voice. "Help, please. Please help." She rattles the doorknob, her panic growing with every passing second, but you can't help her. You're miles away. The house is empty. By the time you see the footage, she's already gone, vanished back into the night. Who was this little girl, and what was she so terrified of? For 6 years, this haunting question has remained unanswered. Tonight, we're going to look into the chilling mystery of the girl on the porch and explore the dark theories about what might have happened to her.